PFL 5 takes place June 17th in the Atlantic City bubble. And joining me, the color commentator for the PFL, former heavyweight champion, light heavyweight champion, UFC Hall of Famer, Randy the Natural Couture. Randy, thank you for joining Fansided today. Thank you for taking the time out to talk.
You bet, man. Thank you. Thanks for having us on.
So, the PFL and PFL 5, we got an interesting card. We got Rory MacDonald taking on Gleison Tibau in the headliner, Ray Cooper
Yeah.
third in action, Sorty, Cambozi, Carlos Jr., Tom Lawler, Millender, Magomed, and knocking on, I don't have real wood everywhere, but knocking on some wood that I can, that unlike last week, we won't have any last minute shakeups. But out of all
Yeah.
the fights that we got, what is the one that you think people need to watch out for?
Gosh, well, this whole main card is great from top to bottom. Obviously, Rory MacDonald back in there, and after a very, very impressive first outing with the PFL, did a great job. Ray Cooper, I mean, every time this guy storms into the arena and up into that cage, I get excited because something explosive is going to happen. Emiliano Sordi coming back, I mean, damn near a perfect season in 2019, 5 finishes. We saw him have to dig deep in his first outing. I didn't realize that he had been sick and that he was still recovering. I don't think a lot of people realized he kept that pretty quiet and man, dig deep and get a win there. So I'm expecting to see a little bit different Emiliano this time out. You mentioned Shoeface, against Vinny Magalesh. I mean, 2 world-class grapplers. How do they settle this? I mean, that's going to be a very exciting fight. I mean, from top to bottom, there's just a lot of great fights. These 2 weight classes traditionally in the PFL in our first 2 seasons are literally have a 71% finish rate. I mean, it's remarkable. They just get after it.
Yeah, it should be absolutely entertaining tomorrow. And speaking of tomorrow, Ray Cooper III, Rory MacDonald, they are probably the 2 biggest names right now at that welterweight scene in the PFL. They are the top 2 right now in the welterweight standings, both getting first round finishes last month. They should be the favorites to win it all. If you had to pick the 2, because maybe they end up getting paired during the postseason, but who would you give the edge to, and who would you give the edge to tomorrow to be in first place? Because you got MacDonald, who has the experience, but he's got a tough opponent in Gleison Tibau, great jiu-jitsu guy, and then you got Ray Cooper, who's competing in the co-main event against Alexakin.
Alexakin, who is no slouch by any stretch of the imagination. So they both got tough matches. So I mean, it's really tough to pick. I mean, we got Magomed Kirimov, our 2019 champ, coming back. The one guy that beat, or 2018 champ rather, the one guy that beat Cooper in the finals, and Cooper's dying for that rematch. I mean, he's going to be in the mix. He's under the gun now because because of visa issues, he missed his first fight, which puts him a point down. And especially in this division, those points are critical for getting the postseason nod. So it's going to be interesting to see how he steps up to try and make up some points and secure one of those 4 spots in the playoffs. But those 2 guys, you're right, I think right now the favorites to be the top seeds. It's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out. We know both guys bring it. Rory's got a little more tactical, technical style. Ray's just a little more wide open and raw in the way that he fights. It's a very interesting style matchup. I'm sure they're both hoping they don't see each other till the finals, honestly.
Probably. And that should be a heck of a finals if that's what it ends up being. But to go a little bit back with the PFL. So when you were first approached about the PFL, which this regular season format started in 2018 with the regular season playoffs, what did you make of that concept? Were you on it right away, or was there a part of you a little skeptical? Because it was unique. It's something we hadn't seen before.
Yeah, I was definitely, honestly, a little skeptical. Asking the fighters to turn around every 6 or 7 weeks, 8 weeks in some cases, and fight again. I thought, man, that's a big ask. That's a tough one. And then I had to really kind of step back and analyze my own fighting career. And I know if I was in my mid-20s to early 30s, I would be all over this format. Knowing ahead of time when your next fight date was. I mean, a lot of fighters of experience, sitting around waiting for your next fight, not knowing when that's going to be scheduled and when you're going to get on another card. So I think that went away. Seeing these guys actually step up and deal with that adversity, in previous seasons, they've had to fight twice in one night, which was something that I had to do. Obviously, we narrowed it down a little bit this season, only 4 advancing to the playoffs. So nobody's fighting the quarterfinals and semifinals in one night. So that's one piece of adversity that's maybe gone this season. The downside to that is it's a little tougher to get into playoffs. Those points become a little more critical. So I'm not sure which the guys would rather do, have more options to get to the playoffs and fight, more, or narrow it down and not have to fight twice in one night. It's a toss up probably, but I did have some questions about the format. I've been pleasantly surprised to see these athletes embrace that adversity, wholeheartedly, and just get after it. They get out there and get after it. It's been fun.
And speaking of unique, obviously the 2021 season a little more unique in that we've been having the bubble formats. Right now, you guys are in the Atlantic City bubble, going to Hollywood, Florida for the semifinals. But what has this experience been like commentating where there's, no fans in attendance?
Yeah, it's a little strange. It's almost surreal to be watching fights at this level and not have a crowd there roaring in the background. I think it's strange for the fighters. It takes me back to the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, where those guys were fighting literally for their lives on the show, and there was no crowd in there. You could hear a pin drop in there most of the time. So the upside, you can hear your corner great. We can hear the corner great. We know exactly what instructions are being shouted out and how they're seeing it. And so it gives it a unique flavor for sure.
And so can the opponent's corner hear your corner.
Yeah. The problem with us is there's 22 countries represented. You're never sure what language is going to be coming out over there.
That's a fair point. Sticking with Atlantic City. Now, you have a little bit of history with Atlantic City. That was the place where you beat Kevin Randleman for your second heavyweight title in the UFC. Yep. And actually, we just passed last month the 20th anniversary of your first fight with Pedro Hizo, probably one of the best heavyweight title fights in UFC history, the fight of the year for sure for 2001. So just whenever you get to Atlantic City, is there just a part of you that has a special feeling that, you have this connection, these moments in this city?
Yes, absolutely. I remember both of those fights were big step up, big fights for me in my career and keeping me moving forward. I remember driving down the Parkway to get here. It was the first time ever seeing my mug on a billboard coming into Atlantic City. First fight my mother ever attended in person and didn't watch on TV was here in Atlantic City in that first Pedro fight. Getting taken down by Kevin and for the first 2 rounds. And anytime I faced another wrestler, I knew it was going to be a tougher fight for me that takes away a lot of my game. So that was a big fight for me to face a wrestler at his level and find a way to solve the problem and come out on top. So, yeah, a lot of fond memories for me in Atlantic City for sure.
Now, of course, the Pedro Hizo fights, we had the 20th anniversary of the second fight later this year in November. Of course, that was in Vegas, not in Atlantic City. But would you say one of those 2 fights or the Randleman fight, what would you say is the favorite fight of your career?
I'd have to go to the Tim Sylvia fight in
the
Ohio.
Comeback, yeah.
Yeah, that crowd that night was just absolutely remarkable. I'll never forget that last 10-second countdown in that 5th round in that fight. And it was just an amazing experience. The energy that night was just ridiculous, off the chain.
Now, going back to the PFL and the commentating. Now, Kenny Florian joined the booth this season, and we've been having a little bit of conversation about Tough. Actually, 2 members of Extreme Couture, Ryder Newman and Miles, are competing right now on the new season of Tough. But it's funny, it feels like it's kind of full circle with you and K-Flow, because you were the coach on the first season of Tough, and one of the participants was Kenny Florian, made it to the finals, lost to Diego Sanchez. So how does it feel, to, like I said, come full circle, go from coaching Kenny on that first season of Tough to now partnering with him in the PFL?
It's been very comfortable. Obviously we've known each other a long time, worked closely together. I admired the work he'd done in the commentary booth before. He's very articulate. He knows the sport as well as anybody on the planet. So it's been fun and in a lot of ways seamless. Sliding him in just felt comfortable and seemed to work really, really well. I think we all have a really good chemistry. Sean does a lot of the heavy lifting, calling the play-by-play and doing the stuff that he does. And me and Kenny bring, I think, a unique flavor to the booth. So it's been fun, a blast.
I was going to mention in the PFL, you're talking about unique concepts. It's a unique concept in the three-man commentating booth where all three of you have had fighting experience. There's no, say, Anik, Ronaldo, or your old buddy Mike Goldberg. Well, actually, I mean, Sean is pretty much in that role, but Sean it wasn't too long ago, he was fighting in the PFL and won a championship. Yeah. So how different is the atmosphere and commentating in that booth compared to, say, that stint in UFC, small stint where you were commentating with Rogan and Goldberg?
I don't think people appreciate just how difficult that role is that Sean is filling and how good a job guys like John Anik do in the play-by-play and doing all the ins and outs and every little segment and just all the stuff. And Sean just, man, I thought he was crazy, taking off his suit, putting on his trunks and going in the cage sometimes on the same night that he was commentating. I was like, man, how are you doing that? That just seemed like it, but I get it. He handled it very well. He did a great job. Obviously, one of our champs in the light heavyweight division. He really makes it easy because he knows the sport so well. He teased me and Kenny up perfectly because he knows exactly what he's looking at. He just does a great job. I'm very impressed with him.
Now, looking back on last week's PFL card, now that we're about a week removed from it, we saw Clarissa Shields make her MMA debut, go basically down 2 rounds to none, and then come back strong in that last part of the second round, get the finish in the third round. Just, an amazing finish, an amazing debut. But what did you think overall of the debut of Clarissa? And I know it's hard to judge from one MMA fight, but what do you see, the success levels for her, both in short and long term?
Well, I just think she's a very diligent athlete. She is in the prime of her career, so it's a risky proposition to foray into mixed martial arts and potentially suffer a loss. And, I just think she embraces that. She checked her ego at the door. She wants to learn the sport. I was amazed at how composed she stayed in literally the worst position you can end up in as a striker in a mixed martial arts fight. So she did a great job of turning it around, staying composed, being resilient, listening to her corner and letting them kind of steer her into putting herself in a position to win the fight when she was down the first 2 rounds. So I was impressed. I was also impressed in her recognition that she still has a lot to learn to be able to keep fights where she wants them, which is in that standing striking realm, and avoid sprawl and brawl and avoid some of the groundwork. I think her attitude was, I didn't appreciate how good this girl was until she got me into trouble. And, I think she's going to be diligent, work on her wrestling, work on those transition skills, work on her ground game, and try to shore that up. It's interesting that she wants to juggle both the boxing ball and the MMA ball at the same time. I think at some point push is going to come to shove and she's going to have to make a decision there because one's going to suffer when she's focused on the other. And I did that early in my career, still wrestling for the national team and trying to focus on mixed martial arts fights. So I know the challenge there. She's going to face that at some point, but she's doing a great job.
It makes me think of, you talked about decision making, makes me think of Clay Collard. I talked to him earlier this year before the season started. And, he was on the boxing route for just about all of 2019, 2020, had an impressive boxing run in 2020. And then earlier this season said, I got to focus now solely on MMA. And look where he is right now. He's one of the top seeds in the lightweight playoffs coming soon.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been very impressive. His hands against Anthony Pettis were on point. He did an amazing job there. Come back strong last week again and doing a great job using that striking and just keeping himself in contention as the number 1, the top seed in that division. So very impressed with him. He's gone the other way, and we've haven't had any mixed martial artists foray into boxing and do it very, very successfully. You've seen Chris Lytle. He had some pro boxing matches. We're seeing him now in the bare knuckles thing, doing very well, very well. He was a great striker and a well-rounded fighter. So Clay's been impressive. and very impressive.
All right. So now speaking of boxing, MMA, it's a crazy time right now because we had Clarissa Shields debut, but now we've had some, let's call them circus show fights as of late. Floyd and Logan. We had this, in my opinion, horrendous fight between Lamar Odom and Aaron Carter, which your old friend and foe Chuck Liddell was the referee for.
Yeah.
We had this whole YouTubers, TikTokers thing, and of course, we you actually have some experience in welcoming, a boxer into the MMA world. They were talking about it all last week. I remember James Toney. You took him down pretty easily, won that fight easily. And now the Paul brothers have said on multiple occasions, we have Jake fighting Ben Askren, Tyron in the boxing ring, but they have
Mhm.
teased, we want to come into bring their money making shtick into MMA. So what do you make of whatever the Paul brothers are doing, just the state of combat sports as we know it? Do you think the Paul brothers, how do you feel about them potentially doing something in MMA?
I mean, they're creating a spectacle in a lot of ways. Yeah, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. The Paul brothers are definitely shining a light on the disparaging difference in pay between mixed martial arts and boxing. We saw this with Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather as well. Conor made more in that one fight than he'll probably ever make in mixed martial arts, at least where mixed martial arts is right now. If you're a fighter, and obviously some of the fighters are paying attention. You're hearing John Jones, squawk about pay. We're hearing some other guys squawk about what they're getting paid for a similar combative sport and not getting remunerated. There's no transparency in MMA. That's what it boils down to. The Ali Act protected boxers from promoters in 1996. We don't enjoy that same protection by the federal legislation. There is no transparency in MMA. And until we create that, stand up as athletes and demand it, in these kind of crazy sensation fights that they're creating. I don't know how they would do that in MMA, I guess. I'm sure there are a lot of mixed martial artists that would love to see Jake or Logan Paul in a cage and in rules of engagement with MMA and see how they fare there. But, who knows? We'll see.
And you're talking about the differences in pay and, fighters, needing more. And it's kind of ironic because Clarissa Shields, she's coming over, because she isn't finding the opportunities in the women's boxing side of things. She sees opportunities in MMA to grow herself and, make more money, on the side as well.
Yeah, I think she's accurate. When's the last time you saw a women's boxing star make headlines in the boxing world? It wasn't until Clarissa Shields stepped over into MMA that now all of a sudden she's on the headlines and making a splash because she's trying mixed martial arts. You've seen Gina Carano, Ronda Rousey, Miesha Tate, Holly Holm,
Amanda Serrano,
Clarissa, all become huge stars through the vehicle of mixed martial arts. And man, you haven't really heard a lot about top female boxers in quite a long time. So I just think that's probably part of the motivation for Clarissa to come over into mixed martial arts, to risk her undefeated legacy in the sport of combative, women's combative sports, to try MMA out.
Now, staying on the topic now of these, whatever you want to call them, circus or freak show fights, I mean, MMA and just combat sports in general, there's a history to it. I mean, Pride, was infamous for having some of these kinds of fights.
Yeah.
Floyd and Conor, that was a, thing that we had never seen before. I mean, we had seen maybe Antonio Inoki, Muhammad Ali back in the day in the 70s, but, I guess it feels kind of different because the Paul brothers, it seems more like a tour of such. They're not one-offs. They're actually doing this and making some good money off of it. But do you feel like, that, this could be damaging to the legacy or spirit of a sport?
Well, I don't know if it's damaging to the legacy or spirit of the sport. Obviously, a lot of people buying pay-per-views. And so on the business side of the house, this is making a lot of sense to the guys putting up money and creating these fights.
Right, no question.
We did see Bob Sapp. We saw Crow Cop come over from K1 Kickboxing to Pride in just this same fashion in Japan. So these kind of crossover sensational fights do attract a lot of attention. And if you're a businessman, that's the kind of thing you want. So I'm not sure how much it hurts the legacy of the sport. Now, I hope that Tyron Woodley comes out on top and is really diligent and puts some good work in with a great boxing coach to get ready for Jake Paul and has a good outing. Obviously, I don't think that helped Ben Askren much in how that fight unfolded and what happened. Why is he picking predominantly wrestling background athletes to compete against? Why doesn't he just pick a really good boxer and go against a really good boxer? I'll give Logan credit because at least he picked a really good boxer to go out there and compete against. Now, he was much bigger than Floyd. I didn't think it was a terribly exciting fight, honestly, but still, he at least picked a real striker, a real bona fide boxer to get in there with. Where Jake is being a little more selective in the guys he's picking. Yeah, they're great names in mixed martial arts, but both those guys are predominantly wrestlers. Both NCAA champions come from a wrestling background, not a striking background. So that's calculated for sure.
So now just my last question, going back to this PFL season. So PFL 5 this week, we have PFL 6, the heavyweights and women lightweights next week to kind of wrap up the season. Actually, PFL 6, there are going to be a featherweight and a lightweight bout, I believe, because of all the mix-ups from last week. But just saying, we're winding down on the regular season. And just out of everything that you've been seeing so far, who do you think, is a favorite, the biggest favorite for their division? Who do you think could be the MVP of this season?
Oh my gosh. So many amazing fighters. We've seen so many guys step up and do just, incredible things. Obviously Lance Palmer and Nathan Schultz, two-time champs trying to get back on track to be able to three-peat, which if either one of those pulls that off is going to be a pretty remarkable feat. But Fabricio Verdum in a kind of a controversial loss in his first outing, who's arguably one of the best pound for pound athletes that we've seen. Anthony Pettis, one of the most dynamic fighters that we've seen in the sport, and he went down in his first fight too, and is now under the gun to come back and get back on track to make the playoffs. There's just so many variables and so many things that are interesting that could happen. It's really tough to narrow it down to one.
And of course, we got Kayla Harrison still killing it in women's lightweight. And it's just,
Yeah.
we're talking about women's lightweight and Clarissa Shields coming over. It would be so cool. I'm just thinking if next year, Clarissa's competing during the season and we get Kayla versus Clarissa, who've had similar, routes in that they win gold in the Olympics and come over to mixed martial arts with the PFL.
Yeah, Kayla Harrison's coming from the exact opposite side of this whole equation. She has a strong, obviously two-time gold medalist grappling background in judo, and she had to learn all the striking and all the other intricacies of MMA and put herself out there just like Clarissa's done. And Clarissa's doing it from the striking side. She's got to learn all the wrestling and all the grappling stuff. In my experience, it's been easier for grapplers to learn the striking and become proficient, at least proficient enough to get where they need to be, than it has been for strikers to learn all the wrestling and grappling stuff. That's just been, in my experience in the 23 years I've been doing this in the sport, it seems like it's been an easier road going one way than it has going the other way. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. I know Clarissa's lucky that wasn't Kayla Harrison on top of her in this first fight debut, or it would have been a different night for sure. So as much as I thought Brittany Elkin had it and did such a great job of getting her where she needed to get her, I think that there are some female athletes out there. Pacheco's another one that probably would have finished Clarissa in that first round once she got to mount. So I think Clarissa recognizes that. I think she knows how much work that she has in front of her to become a real challenger in the women's 155-pound division.
So PFL 5 is tomorrow, June 17th, 5:30 Eastern, 2:30 Pacific for the ESPN Plus card. Main card begins at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Randy Couture, the legendary UFC Hall of Famer, one of the legends of this sport. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you. Have a great day.
You too.